So I sort of stumbled on my own finitist attitude, examining philosophical paradoxes and trying to understand why exactly these paradoxes occur. In many instances, it's simply because more foundational rules need to be applied to preclude outlier instances and get them under control. Zeno's paradoxes of motion are typically my go-to for thinking about these paradoxes, basically and intuitively. To travel from A to B, one must travel at least half the distance before traveling the full distance. One must also travel half of the distance to get from A to B. But we know we can easily travel from A to B. I believe the typical fix for this is to ensure that you calculate the time component, not just the space. This answer is unsatisfying to me. This might work for all intents and purposes, which to be honest is all that's necessary. But it's not really a satisfying answer as to why the paradox emerges in the first place. Let's talk about the first division, the halfway point between A and B. This initial idea is fundamentally problematic. Just by insisting on a halfway point, it's sort of a loaded insistence in that we're insisting that there's more space to divide in the process. We're saying, I'm going to divide this space that I know I already have. We're not starting with, is there space to divide? If we did, then we'd have to really start to think about, when does space run out? What's the fundamental unit of space? But we don't ask that question, so we banish ourselves to circularity, and then we call that infinity because we haven't created the rule to stop the circling. This is why I sort of started into finitism. We create processes to divide things, but we don't set any limits for the circling of the process. Physically speaking, if we just divide our reality again and again, eventually we'd end up at a single particle or a measurable unit of some physical substance. At that point, when you reach that fundamental substance, the process will keep circling for as long as the universe continues to go, which isn't infinity, by the way. It'll continue to try to divide for as long as the universe exists, but at the physical reality, it has reached its limit. So I just began thinking, with certain paradoxes, there must be some way in which the measuring mechanism disassociates from physical reality. That's sort of my approach to investigating paradox today. How has the process failed actual reality? So I'm a tentative classical finitist. I believe that it's at least possible that there's no actual infinity and that it's just generated by circling processes that we fail to limit to correlate with physical reality. For instance, natural numbers are the set of positive integers used for counting and ordering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They begin at 1 and extend indefinitely, forming an infinite sequence. Or seemingly infinite. This is considered the most basic expression of infinity. Just because we can keep adding numbers only proves that we're here to keep adding numbers. When we're not here, numbers stop being added. In order to sort of back up the notion of the infinite, we'd have to have a universe that was infinite by nature, and we'd also have to have a counting machine that was able to count continuously, infinitely. But I just think that we would die and the universe would stop. But perhaps the universe truly is infinite and the circling processes we use to understand it actually do circle forever. But pragmatically, I'm leaning towards classical finitism. Let's talk about finitism. Finitism is a philosophical and mathematical concept that emphasizes the importance of finite or countable mathematical objects and methods, in contrast to approaches that deal with infinite sets or uncountable mathematical structures. Key ideas of finitism: finite objects only. Finitists believe that only finite mathematical objects, such as natural numbers, are truly meaningful. Rejection of infinite sets. They reject the notion of infinite sets as complete entities. While individual natural numbers exist, the set of all natural numbers is not considered a valid mathematical object. Limited quantification. Quantification over infinite domains is not considered meaningful in finitism. Focus on constructive methods. Finitists often favor constructive methods of proof, where mathematical objects are built up from simpler ones in a finite number of steps. Philosophical implications. Finitism challenges more Platonist views of mathematics that treat mathematical objects as having an independent, eternal existence. Mathematical principles emerge from a reality that is evolutionarily deterministic. So while they might not be eternal, I think that we should give them the essence of a billions-year-old universe. I mean, just treating them as contrived concepts that only emerge after subjective agents create them with language, doesn't capture the truth the depth of the universal emergence of these principles. So Platonists treat mathematical objects as having an independent eternal existence. Instead, Finitism views mathematics as a human-created system based on finite constructible objects and methods. Constructive nature. Finitism often aligns with constructivist views in mathematics, focusing on objects that can be explicitly constructed or calculated in a finite number of steps. Classical Finitism versus strict Finitism. Classical Finitism and strict Finitism are two variations of Finitism, differing primarily in their degrees of restriction regarding mathematical entities and processes. Classical Finitism is a moderately restrictive stance, rejecting the actual infinite, such as infinite sets or sequences, while accepting the potential infinite like an indefinitely extensible sequence. For instance, classical finitists might accept that natural numbers can be extended indefinitely, but they would not regard the infinite set of natural numbers as a completed entity. This approach aligns with traditional mathematical practices, provided the infinite is treated as a process rather than an object. Strict finitism, on the other hand, is a more radical view, rejecting not only the actual infinite, but also the potential infinite in certain contexts. Strict finitists impose practical or physical constraints on the size and complexity of mathematical objects, often considering only those that can be explicitly constructed or conceived within a finite framework. For example, they may argue that very large numbers beyond practical computation are meaningless or irrelevant. Strict finitism is less commonly adopted, as it imposes significant limitations on mathematical reasoning, but it serves as a lens for critically examining the assumptions underlying classical mathematics. Both views share a common foundation in finitist philosophy, but their scope and implications differ significantly, reflecting a spectrum of attitudes toward infinity in mathematics. Definitely, you guys do your own deep dives when it comes to the mathematics on this. I just covered this topic because of all the paradox studies I've done, and this research helped me understand that what I thought to be the case about infinity was called finitism. Infinity is perplexing, but it's sort of like the God notion to me. I don't see any real evidence of unending things, but we know so little about our reality, we can't rule it out. I mean, I do rule out God. I'm just saying, as far as infinity goes, you have to leave it as an open-ended question. And if there was truly infinity, I'd start to ask my questions about God again. I don't see any real evidence of unending things, but we know so little about our reality, we can't rule it out. But that's a problem too. What is it that we can't rule out? We can't even define the thing, so we can't even begin the process of ruling it out. If you can't define it, how do you even know it's a thing and you just didn't give it a word? I can't rule out a thing that I don't even know what it is yet. This is where we begin the process of ruling things out and defining them at the same time. If you guys like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.